o'clock, so I thought we'd get started. There may be a few people who wander in, and we will welcome them, absolutely. But thank you all very much for being here. My name is Karen Smythe, and I'm the Executive Director of the Beatrix Farrand Garden Association. And welcome to the Farrand Forward Symposium. We're really thrilled to have you here. And we're also especially excited to have our fabulous panelists here as well. I do need to do the important work of thanking our sponsors. So Monty's Kitchen and Tap Room, it's a lovely little restaurant out in Amenia, New York. We have Peony sponsors, Page Park Associates, Gold's Gym, Adams Fairacre Farm, and the Mattiello Group from Merrill Lynch. And then, of course, we do need to thank our weeders. We have a group of volunteer weeders that I know you're going to hear about later, but they enable us to have the beautiful garden that we do next door. And here are our Foxglove sponsors. We have Agri-Sculpture, Baxter Building Corporation, and it's going to go all by itself. Indoor Organic Gardens of Poughkeepsie, LCS Landscape, McCabe & Mack, Munder Skiles, the new Corn Crib Greenhouse, the New York Botanical Garden, Peeler Partners, the Phantom Gardener, and Rhinebeck Bank. They are all listed in our program, and I encourage you to support both our sponsors and our advertisers because they are such an important support to our organization and to our whole community. There we go. And of course, I'm going to encourage you to become a member of the Beatrix Farrand Garden Association because that's my job. And just to let you know, and you're going to hear more about this today, but we do a variety of educational programs, and the film that you're going to see this evening, that I hope many of you will stay to see, is going to become part of our educational programs going forward. And I'm also particularly excited to announce that today we are launching the Beatrix Farrand Alliance. This is a new web-based community that seeks to foster meaningful communication and an exchange of ideas among the community of professional designers, horticulturists, and passionate enthusiasts interested in Beatrix Farrand, a groundbreaking designer and pioneering woman. The Alliance will offer membership to both institutions and individuals for a nominal donation and create a space for members to share information, scholarship, and ultimately work together to develop more programs just like this weekend. And this is the landing page. It is beatrixfarrandalliance.org. And just to give you a flavor, sources of a lot of the archival material that we used in the film is listed on this website. So you know where to go. You say, if I'm looking for a particular type of information about Beatrix Farrand, this is an archival location, I can go there, and the information or a link to that information is here on the website. So we really hope that you will take a look and sign up and join us in the Beatrix Farrand Alliance. And with that, so now my more important job is to introduce the moderator for today's panel. Lyndon B. Miller is a public garden designer in New York City. Her career began in 1982 when she rescued and restored the Conservatory Garden in Central Park. Her work in New York City includes designs for over 45 different public projects in gardens and parks in all 5 boroughs, including Bryant Park, the New York Botanical Garden, Wagner Park in Battery Park City, and Madison Square Park. Her book, Plants, I always do that, Parks, Plants, and People, Beautifying the Urban Landscape, was the winner of the American Horticultural Society 2010 National Book Award. In 2018, she was named a living landmark by the New York Landmarks Conservancy. And just last month, a previously unnamed narcissus was named Lovely Linden in honor of her work on the Daffodil Project. So then I was supposed to say, please join me in welcoming Lyndon Miller.
You can imagine how I love that about the daffodil. I want to welcome you to this what is going to be a fascinating discussion about caring for the important Farrand landscapes that we are all lucky enough to have still with us all these years after her death in 1959. We have some committed and knowledgeable people here to tell us about what they are doing to preserve them. Now, I'm just going to do a parenthetic school marm bit about how to pronounce Mrs. Farrand's name, because it's important to pronounce her name right. She would hate to have you say it the wrong way. She herself said that you pronounce it fair and, or I would say like errand, Farrand, and I won't even say how the many ways that people pronounce it wrong, but just pronounce it right, for her sake. Lovely Belfield is one of those few precious places that we still can visit to be inspired by Mrs. Farrand's work. I came here back in 2015 to talk about what an important mentor she has always been to me in my work in public spaces in New York City. And by great good fortune, the film you will see later came out of that lecture. I also admire her endlessly because she actually knew her plants and wrote about how to care for them in the long run in her brilliant plant book for Dumbarton Oaks. Now, I'll hold up my own well-thumbed, very much used book. It is one of the best books for anyone who wants to be in the business of plants, and especially people who admire Mrs. Farrand. I also admire her for her plant book, and I believe strongly from 37, I think it's 38 years now of experience, that beautiful public open spaces filled with well-grown and maintained plants are essential to all of our lives. And of course, so did Mrs. Farrand. So that makes her a huge role model to me in my work. Our panelists will talk about what they are doing to preserve her work for all of us. In this troubled world, we need these places and her inspiration more than ever. Now I'm going from my left along there, I guess that would be your right, all the way down. And since all this biographical information, much more than I'm going to say, is in your program, I'm just going to highlight it. And Gail Gladstone, I'm so pleased to meet her. I've been going to Mount Desert for 52 years, and I've never met someone who's in charge of the Acadia National Park. And she's the Cultural Resource Program Manager for Acadia National Park, which, as you know, is, well, I believe that it's about 75% of the island, is it not? A good amount that was given to the public by people like wonderful David Rockefeller. Next comes Anne Green, who's the board chair of Friends of Acadia National Park in Bar Harbor. And then comes my dear friend Ann Sims, who was both an old friend but also my horticulturist for the Beatrix Farrand Garden Association from 1998 to 2017. And that was where she led the team that restored the Farrand Design Garden here, and many of you have been with her on that. And then comes, Karen Weltock, jump over one. A horticulturist and gardener for 4 years who's been taking up care of Belfield, isn't that right? Now, why am I missing? Oh, yes, I jumped and Lindsay's way down there. Anna de Cordova has been working in public gardens and horticultural education for 25 years, but she currently is the horticulturist for the National Park Service at the Roosevelt Vanderbilt National Historic Site, which is where we are today. And then comes Lindsay Milstein is the president and CEO of Dumbarton Oaks Parks Conservancy since 2014. And the Dumbarton Oaks Park is the 27-acre wild component of Mrs. Farrand's Dumbarton Oaks master work. And next to her is my friend Liza Gilbert, who's a landscape designer based in Washington, D.C., and since 2012, she has served as a board member on the Dumbarton Oaks Parks Conservancy, which is a public-private partnership formed in 2010 to work with the National Park Service to save Dumbarton Oaks Park. And that's very much like what the Central Park Conservancy has done, and they, I believe, were the first one ever to start that back in 1980. At that time, it was unique, public-private, working with New York City parks, but this is very interesting because it's the national parks. And now, where am I?
I think I'm missing. I'm Ann Aldrich with Dumbarton Oaks Park Conservancy.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're not on here.
No, I'm not.
Welcome. All right, so Gail, I believe you're the first one to go to tell us about the projects that you're doing.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, my name is Gail Gladstone. Is that good? Closer still. I am the Cultural Resource Program Manager at Acadia National Park. I'm going to be talking today about the carriage road system at Acadia and how their management intersects with Beatrix Farrand's legacy in terms of her collaboration with John D. Rockefeller Jr. and their design intent and how it's held up in the face of changing use. Let's see if that works. Okay. So I work for the National Park Service. This is the obligatory mission slide. Talks about the mission of the National Park Service, focused on preserving both the natural and cultural resources. The resources at Acadia include the glaciated coastal landscapes, the biological diversity, and a rich cultural heritage. Acadia National Park also offers opportunities for high-quality recreation, education, and scientific research. I'm in the Division of Resource Management, which is an interdisciplinary division making management decisions based on best available science and careful planning to help ensure the protection of those resources. Cultural resources at Acadia include the carriage road system, the historic hiking trails, and the motor road. All are managed as cultural landscapes. The carriage road system on Mount Desert Island was conceived, planned, and funded by John D. Rockefeller Jr. between 1913 and 1940. The carriage roads are a good example of how balancing that management of natural and cultural resources. The system reflected his ethic of using private wealth for public enjoyment and conservation. As a historical point, the development of the carriage roads coincide. Oh, geez, look what's happening.
It's doing its own thing. I think you want to go back.
Hold on.
Might iron it out.
All right, where was I? Okay, so the development of the carriage roads coincided with the development of Acadia National Park, and the network establishes the architectural and landscape architectural character of the park. Okay. The design of the roads was meant to provide access to Acadia's spectacular scenery and the experience of being in nature at the speed of a horse-drawn carriage. The alignment was done to provide access to distant views, views of island features, and views of structures such as stone bridges. Farrand refined this vision as she traveled the roads, consulted with Rockefeller, and made recommendations for planting. This is a construction drawing of the carriage roads. They are the country's best example of broken stone roads as a system. This was state-of-the-art technology at the time. They are true roads, approximately 16 feet wide, with gently sloping and curved alignments that utilized locally quarried stone to blend the roads into the landscape. Complete construction, the system was 57 miles long, includes 17 stone bridges and 2 gate lodges. Rockefeller maintained them until his death in 1960. The federal government assumed their care with the agreement that motor vehicles would never be allowed on them. Currently, there are 45 miles within Acadia. Rockefeller assembled a group of designers and craftsmen to implement his vision, and they were a remarkable cast of characters, including local Maine engineers Charles and his son Paul Simpson. Waters Hill was the surveyor who studied the careful alignment. Noted architects from Pocantico Hills Estate, William Wells Bosworth and Charles Stoughton. Grosvenor Atterbury designed the gatehouses, and Beatrix Farrand was the landscape designer who at the time was known for her work on large-scale private estates. Rockefeller Jr. had a keen interest in the landscape, but he really relied on her for her design and plant vocabulary. This is the Bubble Pond Bridge from 1928 at construction. The carriage road goes over top and the motor road goes underneath, and Farrand worked on the landscaping after construction. Farrand worked with Rockefeller for almost 15 years doing planting design on the carriage roads. She had a thorough knowledge of native Maine plants and specifically plants on Mount Desert Island. There are volumes of correspondence between them which show their unique collaboration. In their correspondence, they confer on design and intent, and he often expresses gratitude for her expertise and efforts. All documentation was done in these road notes, is what they called them. And she would stake the plants in the field with nurseryman Charles Miller, who would do the planting, always striving for a natural look. This is kind of hard to see, but this is a 1911 path map, and then zoomed in to that area on the left, shows the tangle of roads and walks prior to carriage road construction. And Rockefeller removed many of these old roads, and Farrand used plantings to erase the scars and to camouflage new construction. Then the same area, 1932 path map showing after carriage road construction. She worked with plants she considered her favorites, such as low-growing blackberry, clematis, and high bush blueberry. She chose plants based on the design intent, and these were primarily to frame views, to enhance the travel experience, to provide screening for what she called healing old or new scars from road construction, quarrying, and new construction. She was very good at looking around and creating a natural plant association that was appropriate to the setting. The fire of 1947, burned across the island 29 square miles, and over 200 structures were lost on the island. The carriage roads served as fire breaks in many cases, but the original plantings were lost. 8 decades later, there is some evidence of original plantings, and currently the park is focused on restoring and maintaining the historic documented vistas. This is a part of a vista management plan. The carriage roads were designed to take advantage of hundreds of views, both intimate and expansive, of lakes, woods, mountains, and ocean. In the 1990s, rehabilitation of the carriage roads began in partnership with Friends of Acadia. Vista clearing had been deferred for many years at this time, thus increasing the scale of the undertaking, making it more of a total restoration. From approximately 200 potentially significant vista locations identified based on historical, ecological, and aesthetic criteria, a list of 100 was prioritized for reopening. The correspondence between Farrand and Rockefeller identified and described many of these significant views, and this is what was used to develop the recommendations. When opening the vistas, all trees are not cut. Using the expertise of the park arborists at the time, great care was taken to save certain trees, while selective removal of others contributed to the framing and sequencing of each view. And currently, this is what we're working on today in partnership again with Friends of Acadia, and this time also National Park Service Olmsted Center for Landscape Preservation. The park is bringing together all of the historic documentation, reviewing the maintenance work that's gone on since the original rehabilitation effort in the 90s, and developing detailed plan with prescription to guide current and future park arborists and crews who will do this highly specialized work. Rockefeller and Farrand had a unique collaborative partnership. His intent for the carriage roads was conveyed through her aesthetic vision and planting design. Farrand had a keen understanding of the carriage road experience from the ground level. Her understanding of the natural setting of the island informed the sequencing and movement of the views. Today, there's more of a mix of users, while there are still horses and carriages, maybe more bicycles and walkers than Junior and Farrand might have anticipated. But the character and integrity of the system overall is intact and remains relevant as the park actively manages these historic resources within the context of an ever-changing landscape. Thank you.
That some of you all I know have been over to see and had a tour today. So let's see. I think we're just. Oops, wrong way. Oh, good, we're good. Ready to go. Okay. So we think of this as a secret garden because it's tucked away here on our beautiful national park. But it also, like the secret garden of Frances Hodgson Burnett's book, this one had a period of neglect and was almost lost to time. So Farrand designed the garden in 1912 for her cousin Thomas Newbold and his wife Sarah, who were from a distinguished family and a longtime friends of their Hyde Park next-door neighbors, the Roosevelts. Thomas Newbold, a Democratic New York State senator, was a mentor to the young Franklin and actually was said to have encouraged him to get into politics. Farrand created this garden in conjunction with a colonial revival renovation of the Newbolds' home by McKim, Mead, and White. And she designed the garden as a series of outdoor rooms along a telescoping axis, making the garden appear longer than it really was when she ran into the Roosevelt's property line on the southern end. The photo from the 1920s is when the garden was still in its heyday, and it shows that telescoping effect with the hedges clipped into really clear architectural green walls and the lush, blousy flower borders. Now, from their wonderful old photo albums, we see the Newbold children, and here we're seeing the grandchildren playing in the garden, raising their prized chickens, cooling off on a hot day with a sprinkler, and building a fort on a snowy one. We love this legacy of Belfield as a family garden, creating intimacy and a real sense of privacy, but this beautiful, magical playground. And you can tell the family just lived in this space. And I'm not sure, I know today we just happen to have the descendants of the Newbolds. We have Mary and his sister Nancy Morgan, and they actually remember, growing up playing in this garden, and they're here with us today. So I hope we'll get to see them later on. The next generation of the family were not able to keep up with the garden with exuberant growth, as you can imagine. And in the 1970s, the family donated the house and its grounds to the Roosevelt Vanderbilt National Historic Site. And at that point, the garden was put into suspended animation, and black plastic was laid down to keep the weeds from taking over. So here we see, in the 1990s, this is sort of what happens, residents of Hyde Park came upon the garden and realized that it was a Beatrix Farrand garden and design, and they began a decades-long process of restoration, along with the National Park Service as our partners, and a nonprofit friends group was formed, which is our Beatrix Farrand Garden Association, in 1994, actually. And it's dedicated to preserving the garden and also educating the public about Farrand's important legacy. So it's always had an education mission. And here we see what happens when the deer are let to browse the hemlock hedges and turn them into pretty much lollipops. And then, so as you see, the hedge had to be completely replaced. Now this bird's eye view, taken from the attic window, shows the hedges grown in and things kind of pull back together, and that really great elongating, telescoping effect that Farrand used by, sort of decreasing. You can see each room gets a little bit narrower, and it sort of extends the view. So this shows you how we found the flower borders. And so you can see among the weeds, the stone edging is hanging on there, a stone edging made from these mammoth stones turned on in and buried deep into the ground, and they are there for the ages. And as well, you can see that the stone wall is for the ages and is in remarkably good shape 100 years, almost 100 years later. And you can also notice the black plastic flapping in the wind. Here are the borders today with their characteristic of Farrand, this monochromatic color harmonies. And she uses, a single color theme for each border, but then as you see, there's all sorts of subtlety and change and gradation within that. Here is one of the several beautiful original drawings, which you can barely see. We were in the era we actually went to Berkeley and took photocopies of these are not digitized, so we really don't have very good images to put up in the electronic world. But we really did rely on these beautiful drawings, and there were a series of them. They were not complete, however, so we searched far and wide in the archive, in all the family's attics, and never found the planting plans. So we've really had to extrapolate using other resources of Farrand's and our own judgment to come up with the planting plans. This is a little before and after of the garden gate, showing the beautiful wrought iron. So we have the original wrought iron, beautiful finial. And these were wonderfully restored, as you can see here, by a Eagle Scout. And we had a great troop that came and helped us, get it all pulled back together and put back in. It took us a little while to get this together.
So the next phase of this garden is to establish the wild garden plantings that hug the exterior of the enclosed formal garden. And Farrand drew the suggestion of a wild garden surround for Belfield in a planting plan for the interior garden. And I'll try, I think, isn't there a laser pointer on this thing? So what fades out here is there's just a wiggly line that snakes around the exterior of the garden, sometimes just a few feet out. And that was her indication line for the Newbolds to say, wild gardens surround. That's the plan we have. And so we have mature trees that persisted to at least the NPS era, and some are there today, and they indicate that the Newbold family at least attempted a wild surround. And today this area is basically what anything looks like when the sole piece of equipment for maintenance is a lawnmower. So that's our starting point, bits and pieces of information and lawnmower maintenance. Let me just put us to the next. That's just so not worth looking at. Sorry. So,
Turn the lights down?
yeah, that might help. Someone, Susan, you want to just push, I think there's graduated buttons. Just hit a low one. Thanks. So some of the bits and pieces are pictured here, and that would be kind of, that was so cool. So close to light. That's looking good. All right, well, I'll just sally forth while you do the tech. Oh, nice. So we have the wild and woollier contributions of exterior trees, and we have the Newbold's daffodils growing in the exterior lawn. We have transitional ornamentals that hang over the walls and hedges, clues, but nothing concrete. And so, of course, we went to committee. And as we plan to put the wild garden in place, we're considering these criteria. Creating a plant list drawn from Farrand's wild garden designs, especially at Dumbarton Oaks. Incorporating Farrand's design principle of having formal gardens appear to merge into or emerge from nature. Her passion for native plants and keen ability to layer them in artistic and naturalistic combinations. To address wildlife pressure, especially deer and woodchucks. And the ways in which the wild gardens surround can help us correct for some contemporary problems like poor wayfinding and weak connections to the surrounding trails and sites.
Karen? Oh, she's got it.
Oh, that's,
Clicker. So, talking about the preservation of our garden has to include our volunteer team. When the garden was discovered in the 90s in the state that Anne described with the black plastic and the deer-eaten hedges, it was actually a local resident and their daughter that discovered that this was a Farrand site and that this was worth restoring, and immediately a volunteer team got together to work on it. And when the nonprofit was formed that hired Anne, its original purpose was to come up with funds to restore the garden, but then the second purpose was to hire professional horticulturists that would lead the way. But volunteers are an integral part of maintaining this site. We have a staff of 3 people in our sister organization, and we have Anna and all of the wonderful National Park Service's resources to help us. But we have a weekly group of volunteers, some of who have been coming for over 20 years,
Yes.
to help with us every single week, rain and hot and cold. And I've adopted them. I've been lucky enough to inherit them from the group that started with Anne, but it's just an incredibly devoted group of people that really make the garden look the way it does. And if you saw it earlier this afternoon before the panel, it's remarkable that this is a volunteer, full steam group. So there's just some of them. They're wonderful. Oops.
Okay, so now
Oh.
you guys, we have to get your,
Oh, you guys, you have the ability, or do you need?
We have the ability.
Okay.
This, like, this in the middle.
Do you have to get it started?
speak right in.
Oh, speak right into it?
Yeah.
Okay, great, okay. So totally thrilled to be here with all of you. We are going to share our story of Dumbarton Oaks Park, restoration and preservation, all accomplished in partnership with Rock Creek Park, our fabulous partner. For this presentation, we're briefly going to walk you through our restoration program, our processes, and our partnership. This quote, written by Mildred Bliss in June of 1933, is inscribed in the formal gardens of Dumbarton Oaks as a lasting tribute to her friend and collaborator of over 20 years. From 1920 to 1941, Farrand, with her patron Mildred Bliss, designed a 53-acre estate in the heart of Georgetown. In 41, the Blisses gave the 16-acre former gardens, the house, library, and collections to Harvard University. The other half of the estate, the 27-acre wild garden, was given to the American people, managed by the National Park Service. This gate is the portal between the formal gardens and its counterpart, the wild garden. As one passes through this gate, one walks from the civilized into the wild. The Conservancy was formed in 2010 with the mission to restore, promote, and maintain this 27-acre wild garden of the estate, working in public-private partnership with Rock Creek Park, the National Park Service. Just as Beatrix and Mildred work steadfastly in collaboration, the Conservancy continues to work in this tradition by mobilizing thousands of volunteers and a wide range of businesses and community groups from the greater Washington region to reclaim, rejuvenate, and restore this unique site. Dumbarton Oaks Estate is one of the very few country-era estate designs with a pairing of both formal and wild gardens still in existence. National Geographic rated the formal gardens as one of the top 10 gardens of the world. Designed as one landscape, the wild garden is an integral part to understanding and appreciating this masterwork. The site was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1967 and again in 2004. With the gift to the National Park Service in 41, Farrand continued her involvement in the transformation from private garden to public park for a decade. Over the last half-century, this designed historic landscape was not protected from environmental crises. The following historic photos bring to life the built design that was created mainly on site by Farrand nearly 100 years ago. Three Sisters Dam, one of the 18 waterfalls that Farrand designed. Laurel Pool, designed to be in the shape of a laurel leaf. looking down from Hazel Walkway, one of the 4 paths that connected the Formal Gardens and the Wild Garden in the stream valley. Arbor Bench. From Clapper Falls, looking down the 5 meadows, the length of the park. Meadow Falls 1, 2, and 3.
A broad range of people from all walks of life visit this urban oasis. Located in a stream valley with substantial topographic change, the park is encircled at the higher elevation of the property line with 16 neighbors, which include embassies, research institutions, schools, a community center, and Rock Creek Park. As evidenced in this 1951 map, the 2 halves of the larger landscape were separated by a chain link fence, the new boundary line between public and private. The Formal Gardens in white, the Wild Garden shaded in green. The Wild Garden was designed to be both the wooded backdrop to the Formal Garden, as well as part of the landscape progression from the formal into the wild. A highly planned circuit walk was the backbone of the Wild Garden, moving through a progression of spaces of different scales, at times mirroring the garden elements above. A visitor would move through not only landscape but time. As Farrand wrote in her initial site survey, the whole scheme for the north slope of the property should properly be studied from the ground itself rather than from any plan, as the contours and expressions of the ground will control the plantations more strongly than any other feature. What had been an agrarian working landscape became a designed garden with spatial narratives that incorporated existing architectural features, existing planting, and the sculptural form of the existing stream valley topography. Oh, I got a switch. In 2006, the Cultural Landscape Foundation sounded the alarm on this deteriorating landscape treasure by listing it as at risk. In 2010, the Conservancy was formed. Flash forward 65,000 volunteer hours later, this image of a landscape completely shrouded by invasive vines no longer exists. Woohoo!
Mobilize a volunteer army to begin the work of revealing Farrand's design. From the onset, the Conservancy has been engaged in triage to save the architectural features, most importantly the 18 stone dams, from complete structural failure due to ever-increasing stormwater flows. Erosion control fabric, sandbags, gravel, felled wood, compost socks, quar logs are some of the temporary measures installed by volunteers to protect the structures. The first step towards garden restoration was our signature project, a 1.7-acre site in the historic American Beech Grove, launched in 2013. With help from the National Trust for Historic Preservation and Architectural Structure, the old stone pump house was restored. The National Park Foundation supported the clearing of all invasives, including 75 mature trees, and then a landscape design was developed and installed by Conservancy volunteers. The area was planted with a native plant palette aligning with Farrand's plant aesthetic. The signature project showed the community what the Conservancy could do to enhance the park experience and create an even greater sense of place. Our partnership viewed the first restoration project as a learning lab, which native plants were tough enough to survive minimal maintenance and watering, what would the public reaction be to an area fenced for a minimum of 3 years, a boots-on-the-ground approach to frame and develop the successive restoration projects. The projects undertaken following the American Beech Grove restoration include Upper Stream Valley, Clifton Walk, Meadows, Sentinel Trees, Forsythia Glen, and rhododendron propagation. 12 acres are under full restoration and long-term maintenance. The spectrum of programs created to support the preservation and understanding of this historic garden include Leave No Child Inside environmental education program, Art in the Park, and the volunteer program. The success on the ground is a reflection of the strong partnership forged between the Conservancy and Rock Creek Park National Park Service. Foundational documents that make this all happen are produced in partnership within the complex regulatory environment. Cultural Landscape Report 1 and 2, the Conditions Assessment Report, the Friends Group Agreement, project plans, permits, cooperative agreement, task orders, annual work plans. All the work to date has brought the partnership into master planning. The master plan and the installation of stormwater controls are the most critical components that we must accomplish now to reach the mission of full restoration of Farrand's designed Dumbarton Oaks Park. Thank you.
Now we want to, let's turn the lights back on. We want to involve you, and that means serious involvement. We want you to ask questions and make comments and really share with us, and as they have shared with you, what they do. First of all, I thought it'd be interesting to find out how many of you are involved in public-private partnerships similar to what they are. Nobody? Well, yes, good.
Volunteers, yeah.
Oh, well, all right. Everybody's suddenly getting religion. Well, okay. So we hope that you will ask questions of these marvelous programs, many of which I so admire and think it's wonderful what they've done. I know that here at Belfield, that the volunteer program started on a Tuesday morning because Ann Sims worked in the conservatory garden, and we always do it on Tuesdays, and so that's our connection there. Do you have any comments? Have you got any feelings about what has been done, or any suggestions about what? Yes, Steve.
Well, I think we could all say something about this, but what is at once our weakness is also our greatest strength. Right. The tension in the partnership, optimizing that tension, and is kind of a necessity that we want present, because sites like these, need it. So the velocity that our partnership can provide in private, and it's just pushing against that in the most respectful way constantly, to get where we're going. It's a fallen forest, it's now or never. So some other thoughts on that?
I think one of the biggest things we've learned is listening. And then figuring out how to bring the private language into the language of the government so we can create a conversation. And once we hit that hurdle, we have a great working team, because the Park Service, the Rock Creek staff is dedicated to saving this park and making it available to the public as the Conservancy is. And I think that's one of the real strengths we have together. Mm-hmm.
I would also just say, I'm pitching in a little bit about our relationship, because I'm sitting here with Anna and realizing we have such a close collaborative relationship working on the garden together. And Anna has so many responsibilities, and yet because she is our liaison, she is always there for us and really listens. She listens to us and communicates so beautifully with the National Park Service. And so we've been able to just have such a beautiful relationship, and it is, we feel so honored, and we feel incredibly supported by it. So, again, there are hoops to jump through, right? Anna knows a lot of hoops, but Anna is also always wants to get to yes.
I would say that, and I think the listening is the key, and I do think my job is to find a way to say yes. I mean, there's no reason on earth why you would want to hold your partner back. As you said, the parks really want the partners to succeed. It only enhances what we offer to the public. So, don't be daunted by the regulations, and don't try not to have knee-jerk reactions. And usually you can find your way to yes, and everyone feels good about it. So.
I know from my own experience in Central Park, the Conservancy was started in 1980, so as I said, it was unique at that time. And the city didn't really want any part of it. The Central Park, if you remember, was acres of degradation and graffiti and broken bottles and crime. And the city really had no choice. Here these people came along and said they were going to put private money into it. And I remember how much they resisted having any volunteers. And eventually, they came to see that everything that the dedicated volunteer people did just made them look better. And they also allowed them to have resources that they had been sort of wasting because they were doing it so badly in the park for other places. But I remember that was something that had to be worked out. I'm sure the New York City Parks Department in 1980 was far cry from you guys, but it was a hard road to hoe at first. Someone put their hand up and I interrupted you. This is Marshall Brown, who is the head of horticulture in New York City Parks, and she's come a long way. She was not around in those bad days at all. You're free. You didn't have anything to do with that.
You have a range here from DC all the way to the coast of Maine. And not only are we dealing with temperature change, but storm damage from extreme flood. You all mentioned in Delmark Notes, but clearly in the Gatiss, there's been so much rain there and ice storms and everything else. And here as well, I'm sure. How do you address the historic landscape or a landscape that can't from 100 years ago when you're trying to recreate a living landscape today? If anybody wants to.
Yeah. You've been dealing with that. Start using the carriage roads as an example with increasing storm frequency and intensity. We're finding that all of the culverts, which, all the infrastructure that keeps those carriage roads where they are is the culverts, and there's drainage ditches and things. And a lot of that is becoming inadequate. So it's standard now when we replace a culvert, it's got to be bigger. And we're finding we're needing to add culverts where they never were before. So yeah, it's definitely it's a maintenance thing that kind of on your feet, you see it happening, and it takes a little bit to figure out what is happening, and then you have to adjust for that.
Well, I think especially, I don't know if you could tell enough from the slides of how dramatic our topography is. So we are basically a bathtub and we assume kind of we're a watershed for 175 acres around. So there are even letters that Farrand wrote that the dams were undersized in 1941 when they were installed. So you have to have a total kind of about a real kind of frank look at what the present conditions are now and be adaptive. And that's really what we're doing. I mean, our boots on the ground approach is, first of all, triage to try to save the architectural features that remain. And then we have some very large plans at one end of the park to build an RSC to help solve our stormwater problem. But you have to be extremely adaptive and do a real conditions assessment report of what you're dealing with now. And that we've done.
Multidisciplinary, integrated, getting as many, so when you're doing an RSC like this, you've got a bunch of engineers in the room, making sure the horticulturalists are in the room so that we get the right plants moving through the stormwater system. Worked with Claudia West, Larry Weiner in that regard, and really gotten a deep dive into purposing so that you get it right straight from the start. And all the systems are firing at once. So it's a really rich adaptive management style.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question, if that's okay. You're coming from a horticultural background. I'm just wondering if there are plant choices you had to make that were quite different from what Farrand chose or you would have chosen because of either the changing climate or the changing precipitation that sort of entered into your planting palette and potentially not. And how you address the horticultural transition when you're talking about restoration.
Many of those invasive vines in that horrible picture were Farrand plants. That was bittersweet and porcelainberry. The bamboo.
Because they weren't considered invasive in
No,
those days.
they weren't. They had not, the
She'd be
climate.
horrified.
Yeah, she actually wrote to the Park Service at one point in the 40s that said, plant Japanese honeysuckle on the fence between the park and Dumbarton Oaks, between the formal gardens. But please keep an eye on it because it can be aggressive, and take it out if it does. So she would be appalled to see what her plants did. So when we redid the Beach Grove, and for every landscape design we do, there are no design plans. Belfield has plans of some sort. We have none for Dumbarton Oaks Park. So we use historic photos, her plant book from the formal gardens, and you can still get the sense of space.
This.
The plant book. And you can get her sense of space by all the large trees that are still there, the rhododendrons that are still there, the stonework that's still there. And then we look at the native palette for DC, and we pull the plants that would give the same form or sense of place and bring them into the palette. And Farrand was a strong, strong advocate for our native plants. So we know she's smiling on us as we do this.
Well, and one great irony is with all of that stormwater, we have no irrigation.
You have no irrigation.
We have no irrigation. I mean, we borrow a hose here and there from the upper gardens, but besides that, we just have to be really smart about our time frame, or it's bucket brigades with thousands of people.
Or the plant choices we put in there.
Yeah.
Nothing that's water loving goes upslope. It's right down on the stream.
But that's why this book is so brilliant, and why I admire her so much. She used plants to design with the way some landscape architects use hardscape. She used plants. But also, if you read this book, she says what her design intent was, what's there, and what to do if in the inevitable time frame the plant outgrows its space, gets too big, doesn't look right. She's very practical about that. I've been using this book for years, and I tell people I teach, and I often make nasty remarks that all landscape architects should be forced to read this book.
Totally agreed.
My name is Christina Miller. I work at Yale University in the planning office and look out and work on a cultural landscape report. So I have a question for Dumbarton Oaks. About your report, what you learned out of it, you guys see it, right? Who managed it between the two sides? Did you come together with coordinated way, or was it MPS? I'd like to learn more about how you managed that and what you learned from it.
There's a lot of questions there. I can answer some, but I think everybody should. What was it, Anne, 1990, when this,
92 was the first
92?
group that tried to save Dumbarton Oaks Park.
Right.
So
paid
that,
for
that
it, and it
report
was
goes back to
done.
92.
Yeah.
It was not published until 2000.
But have you been updating it with the things that you've learned?
Not directly in terms of this, but we have a cultural landscape report too that's seen more as a living document, and things like our conditions assessment report move
Oh,
into
wonderful.
that binder.
Is that available? You can go online and find it, or
Yeah, they're
what?
both on our website, right? And other places publicly, I think. But these recommendations, they're not action plans, and there's still a lot of decisions that you need to make post. So master planning, post this level of research, actionable steps. Well, we are in triage and active design phases, so there's just many layers moving at once. And then something that I learned in our first master planning sessions was that, you know, we met the people that wrote these things. I mean, our project manager in our Rock Creek Park, Maureen Joseph, we know her well, but other cultural landscape report writers, and understood a little bit better about how there is a time frame on them, and that they do go stale, and that you do need to, I mean, we're dealing with living landscapes, and we're dealing with, you know, built structures that are, you know, in the landslide. So kind of the chewiness between, you know, really diving into this document as a guiding document for our partner, it is the number one, you know, purposing point around everything, and it's quite necessary because cultural resources and maintenance, and I mean, it's kind of a center point for each one of these management teams to come in on a site like this. But the master planning step is integral to take us into the site and be able to take on the different recommendations and figure out what are the current conditions and which is the most optimized direction to move in.
Mm-hmm. Also, we're for the last 9 years have been currently engaging with this place in so many different ways that the Park Service has not. So from the thousands of volunteers and the programming, and it's alive in a way to us that it isn't alive in those documents. So there needs to be a combination of, I'm sure you have your experience at Yale and all the years that you've been there, but it's a combination of all that together. So it's a lot of our metrics and observations of being in the park for so long, and, you know, day in, day out, different weather, different seasons, and then also learning from the projects that we're doing, right? What's working, what's not, and engaging the public to get involved in this project. So it's a combination.
Liza, since you guys are professionals in your own lives, and you're part of the management. But since I started a volunteer program to restore the conservatory garden, and other places have done this, you talk about thousands of volunteers. How do you organize them? You can't just let them say, hi, how are you? Just go. Do you give them a set of instructions? Do they come at certain times?
Here's the cowgirl who does that, this one right here.
My background is I served for 32 years in the Bureau of Land Management, and I used volunteers to get government work done on Western lands. So the most important thing to volunteer management is care and feeding. Figure out what they want to learn, how they want to work, and then empower them to go. And we'll cover a little more of that in the next presentation.
Good. Yes.
So initially, these landscapes were designed for enjoyment by a small audience, and now clearly you have many more people visiting. I'm just wondering how you're balancing engaging the public to visit, but not allowing them to visit.
Well, I can say a little something about Acadia National Park. I don't know how many of you have been up there, but our season is really extended. It used to be kind of a summer season. Now it's due to climate change and weather patterns has really going from May to November. We saw 3.5 million visitors last year. And we anticipate that will continue. And currently we're working on a transportation plan, which record of decision was just approved, I think, 3 weeks ago. And that is really about visitor experience, and it will incorporate a reservation system in the park. And Acadia is one of the first parks to have a transportation system that will be piloted and go in effect. And it's really geared around the major areas of congestion. Cadillac Mountain, which was closed, I think, 62 times last summer, the Ocean Drive, and Jordan Pond House. And we have a bus shuttle system, the Island Explorer, which we help fund, as well as LL Bean, and that just moves a tremendous amount of people through the park, but it's not a solution. So that's what we're doing to address the increased visitation.
Yeah, and there is also just a changing way that people use the park too. So we're seeing impacts to the hiking trails where people used to, want to scramble up a boulder. Now they have dogs and they want to go up, so they can't go up a boulder. They have to go around. So we're seeing those kind of impacts, and I think the park, just as far as management, has to be a little flexible, because you can't force people to keep doing the same thing the way. So the park has to change as well.
And we have the cruise ship industry visiting us now, so they come off season, and that is just, ships are enormous. And I think there are 162 ships, large, that come in.
I would just say for our part, I think it's very interesting that wholesale people just bring their museum manners here. And in the Farrand Garden, they are on that gravel path. You almost want to see them enjoy it more. And this is all true unless they're in their vehicles. In the car, all bets are off what any visitor would do. But once out of the car, in all areas of our park, people are extraordinarily respectful. And I would say, to a fault, we have this picnic shelter right outside the Farrand Garden, and hundreds of kids have lunch there and blow off steam running on the lawn between a tour and the museum, or whatever school programs are going on. And you hear parents and teachers, over my dead body will you go in that gate? And you're thinking like, So it's just maybe the flavor of what our offerings are, and the presidential gravesite, and these unbelievable
this is a secret
homes.
garden, and nobody knows it's there.
Yeah.
There's nobody ever there.
It's a problem we would almost welcome.
So you would rather have more people visit it than you find it. Can't you do some of that with signage?
You could. I think more I would never fault anyone for being ultra respectful, but if anyone goes to Valkill tomorrow, people will not leave a flagstone path, and the whole point of a Valkill is to relax in nature and walk close to the water and go a little bit, and I think there's a little loosening up that could happen, but I'm sure anyone who has it too loose would tell me not to worry about
Well, you saw that there
problem.
was an article about how ghastly it is to be on the subway at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because the kids make so much noise. So you don't really want all those school children going wild in there.
Exactly. My only point is we don't, we almost have the opposite of
it's
what
interesting.
you might worry about.
Yes, please go. Why don't you stand up so everybody can hear you?
I just would like to hear about your vision for the Alliance.
Ooh.
What you're thinking.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Sarah Olson was the superintendent here at this beautiful national park for many, many years that I've been working here, and I'm so happy to see you and have you with us. She was incredibly supportive of our work at the garden, and talk about yes, Sarah was just wonderful. So thank you for being here, and thanks for asking. I want Karen Waltuck to tell us about the Alliance. She has worked so tirelessly getting our launch together, this beautiful website that we just saw a little sneak preview of. And so share,
So the film that we're showing this weekend has been in the works for over 3 years, is that about right?
Yeah.
And obviously enormous amounts of research went into it and so many interviews and so much traveling all over the country to meet people and see archives. And it was too great a wealth of information to kind of let it just be that. It needs to be disseminated, it needs to be shared with other organizations. We often get emails from people that say, hey, I just bought a house and I found out that Farrand designed the backyard. Do you want to help me figure out what should be there? And wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a place that you could go online or with your community of other colleagues to talk about, oh yeah, there's many plans from this period, or yeah, we know a plant list that was really successful in your climate zone, or we know someone in your area that has a lot of information that could help you. So we're hoping that we can put out feelers and an invitation to all the resources that Anne and the director Stephen Ives found through his production company. All these different people that were interviewed could be invited to make a more permanent community of Farrand enthusiasts, right? So it could be experts, but it could also be laymen and people who are just really excited about her and appreciate her sites. So the first step is we made a website, and then the second step is to get people to sign up and join us. And, you know, Anne is a wonderful educator, and she has a whole series of curriculum that she shares with students that we have on our site. And it would be great if we could also share curricula among all the different organizations, because I'm sure, as you said, you need volunteers to learn things they want to learn. And there's groups of people that come to our garden that always ask the same questions over and over again. So it would be great to kind of form a whole series of information that we can share amongst each other, and it can only be a good thing.
Yeah. And we've set up forums, so we're going to develop a series of forums. So it's, you know, if you have a particular interest, or I'm looking for this rare iris and can't find, you know, and we can really share. I mean, there's so much that we can share.
Or my plant list was all invasives. What
Yeah,
do you replace
what do I
it
do?
with, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think that works. Yeah, how are we on time?
It's right about like 3:15. Do you want to stop and have people, don't go away, but you have one more question?
Just two quick questions. I have a question for Ann. Is it Simon?
Sims, yeah.
So I'm just amazed that someone can walk into that space years ago and, you know, even guess that it was a Beatrix
Yeah.
art. I mean, how does that happen?
Well, you know, and I didn't walk in at the very beginning, but I walked in about 4 years later when there was, you know, the black plastic. But I think it's the structure, the walls, the edging, you know, the edging I was talking about that's so massive, and the scale. It's a lot about what you all were saying, that there's a kind of a sense of space and proportion that is just right, you know, that rings. And I think, you know, that was really what the original founders saw. And I think they saw, wait a minute, this is an interesting, really elaborate, I mean, it's simple in its way, but it had a lot of features. Wall garden, somebody must have designed this, you know, and so they did the initial research, and luckily, because of the archive at Berkeley, were able to find, you know, that it was Farrand. I think there were, you know, there's some, you know, one thing that's very similar between our garden and Dunbar Oaks, the formal part is there's that telescoping effect that she used, and you get that right off the out the back of the house there.
The North Vista.
The North Vista. And so, you know, there were certain, you know, again, things are pretty subtle, but there were certain characteristics that kind of...
I will also add that she comes from a long horticultural background. Her mother was a great nursery woman. She had plants and garden design and everything in her blood when I met her anyway, a long time ago.
Yeah.
And second to question.
Oh, yeah.
Is there a plan for the restoration of the altar for the house?
Well, what do you like about it? We just had scaffolding up there for a year and a half. The roof got done, windows got reworked. I mean,
There's a process.
There's always a process, but it is one feature of a very large park that includes a Vanderbilt mansion, the home of Franklin Roosevelt. So it gets its care in a pecking order, but not, I mean, it's not a low priority project, but it has active projects going even now. So it's used for our administrative offices. And that may make you a little bit sad, but they're very nice tenants, and
Well behaved, right?
and it is a buffer. It really contributes to the story of how the Roosevelts lived and what their neighborhood was like and who they borrowed a cup of sugar from. It's important, and it allows it not to be developed in other ways, but it's also great that our offices are not stuck in a historic structure that is really part of our national park story and mission. We're in the neighbor's house, and that's a good thing. So the neighbor's house gets care without really intruding on the Roosevelt acreage and square footage of housing. So my office is in an absolutely stunning building, the Vanderbilt Coach House, and we would love very, very much not to have a maintenance operation coming out of this fabulous historic structure. So it's always ideal not to have operations in our real core buildings. But it does get, maybe we should have kept the scaffolding up for the symposium. I was glad it came down, but it does get work.
It does get work.
Yeah.
I just want to add that, because I work in the garden, I saw some of the maintenance work, and people would be there on Tuesdays, painstakingly working on the brass fittings inside of Belleville.
Yeah.
Right.
So, the work is not just, let's come in and update the kitchen. It's
Yeah.
let's just look at that. So,
Yeah, that's good. Good point.
You have one more, and then I think we can all get some refreshments, since if other people have questions, save them. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Susan Whalen from the Harvest Memorial State Park Garden in Waterford. I have a kind of climate-related question. We're really lucky to have a lot of original plant lists that for the garden, but we're finding with a changing climate that a lot of plants that were specified just aren't thriving and surviving anymore.
Last year, yeah.
I'd love to know, at what point do you give up the ghost? On some of the cultivars that Mrs. Farrand specified, and move on to a newer cultivar, horrors, that, maybe will
She would encourage that. She would
would
encourage
not
that.
want
But just so everyone knows, this is a Farrand state park made from a Mrs. Farrand garden that she did for the Harkness family. She did a lot of things for them. And it almost died. It almost went away. It was going to be turned into an amphitheater, as I recall. And it was women like you who saved that place, kept it for us all. And it has both of Mrs. Farrand, a wonderful, one side of it is, I see much more of Mrs. Farrand in it than I do the other side. But so it's something for, you should all go and see it, because it's there. There aren't many Farrand places still left that are open to the public. They're the ones in Mount Desert and the carriage roads, and here, and Dumbarton Oaks, and the Harkness.
Yeah, I think Farrand would give us her blessing if she saw what we were coping with. And Karen this last season that Karen Waltuck had just melting plants with just the rain and the heat, the extreme heat, right? It knocks it, yeah. So I think, it's always a beautiful thing if you can get one of those. And one thing I do find that she used a lot of straight species as opposed to, some lovely cultivar. She just went with a straight species geranium or something, and I find that those are tougher and, and they're not as showy and lovely on one level, but I think they hang on there and they do their job. And
When I was working at Princeton, I was redesigning something that she'd done that was everything. The sundial was in the shade, the roses were mangy beyond belief. But when I did it, I tried to restore it in what I felt. She was right back here, and I was having a conversation with her. Now, this is a better plant, Mrs. Farrand, that has been developed now, like Geranium Roseanne, which isn't a species, of course, but I think it's a spectacular plant. So I kind of had this dialogue with her. I hope it's okay with you, but I'm going to put in this because I think it's the kind of thing you might like.
I think you're right. Us on the other hand.
We could have had quite a conversation. Shall we go?
Yeah, let's have a
refreshments.
Okay, good afternoon. Ann Green, and I am the board chair at Friends of Acadia. Our board is 24 strong. Half of the board are year-round residents by charter, and the other half are summer residents. And thank you for having me today. And I also found out that we are summer neighbors, so that's a really nice connection. I'm going to read the mission statement because it really drives the work we do. And if we ever have any question about is that a right fit for the organization, the park, we always come back to the mission statement. Friends of Acadia preserves, protects, and promotes stewardship of the outstanding natural beauty, ecological vitality, and distinctive cultural resources of Acadia National Park and the surrounding communities for the inspiration, enjoyment of current and future generations. I just want to say a little bit about partnerships. They are so critical to facing challenges and addressing growth and dealing with funding. And we're really blessed to have such a wonderful partnership with our park friends in Acadia. Our superintendent is Kevin Schneider, and he has just been a rock star. He's came on a few years ago, and he is really getting a lot done in DC, including the record of decision with the transportation plan, which I mentioned. Friends of Acadia was founded in 1986 by Marilyn Edwards, and she was a female volunteer and just started the idea. All right. So a little bit about Friends of Acadia. We employ 30 full-time, 30 staff, including summit stewards, recreation technicians, wild garden, gardener and intern, stewardship assistants, advocacy assistants. We have an Acadia digital media team and stream monitoring intern. And we also have a 16 Acadia Youth Conservation kids, a coordinator, and 2 exotic plant management team managers, 6 Acadia teacher fellows, and 1 to 2 seasonal educators and rangers. Acadia National Park takes the lead on education about Mrs. Farrand with work with park visitors. They have a page on their website dedicated to her, and she is mentioned on their website about carriage roads, as well as the Carriage Roads Users Map, which is a publication that visitors use to navigate the carriage roads. And it is an honor that Friends of Acadia is also included in the story of the carriage roads. Education. There are several organizations on Mount Desert Island that do an incredible job preserving Beatrix Farrand's legacy and ensuring that her story continues to be told. They include the Beatrix Farrand Society, an organization dedicated to fostering the art and science of horticulture and landscape designs, with emphasis on the life and work of Beatrix Farrand. The organization is located at Garland Farm, Mrs. Farrand's last house and garden, where she lived well until 1959. The Land and Garden Preserve also maintains several gardens with historic ties to Beatrix Farrand. The Astaku Azalea Garden and Thuya Gardens have many of the plantings that were moved from Mrs. Farrand's Reef Point Garden when it was dismantled, and the Abbey Aldridge Rockefeller Gardens was designed by Farrand. College of the Atlantic also has preserved one of her gardens behind the hall on campus. The campus is comprised of old estates. Can I just, just curious, how many of you have been up to Mount Desert Island or Acadia National Park? Oh, wow. Good. Well, there's all our visitors.
Well, I guess that's where you all got bitten by the bug, huh?
Okay, slide 5. Little bit about public engagement. Friends of Acadia engaged the public to preserve Farrand's legacy on the carriage roads at Acadia through several means. Fundraising to protect the carriage roads for long-term enjoyment of the resource, volunteerism, events, internships, and youth employment and advocacy. When the carriage roads were gifted to Acadia National Park upon the death of John D. Rockefeller, they gradually fell into disrepair because the Park Service did not have sufficient funding of work trails to maintain them to the standards that Rockefeller had. Coping stones would fall off the edge of the roads, woody vegetation would grow in the ditches, and drainage features, grasses and weeds, would grow in between the coping stones. All of these things created erosion, making the roads less sustainable and enjoyable by visitors. From 1992 to 1995, Friends of Acadia, the park, David Rockefeller, Senator George Mitchell, Senator Snow, and others met to shape a partnership to rehab the carriage roads and maintain them in perpetuity. In 1995, Friends of Acadia and the National Park Service signed a memo of understanding that committed the national park to contribute $4 million towards the restoration. Friends of Acadia agreed to raise an equal amount for endowment to help with the long-term maintenance. Friends of Acadia has managed the endowment ever since and makes annual grants to the National Park Service based on sustainable spending policy. FOA can take up to 0.5% of this funding to help pay for management of the endowment. One contribution to the carriage roads funds a professional team to do overall basic maintenance work, such as the rolling of the carriage roads, the raking of the road surfaces, and rock work. The park sets the work plan and reports accomplishments annually to FOA so we can report to our donors. The park often secures federal funding to match FOA funds or accomplish large projects, such as repointing the carriage road bridges and reconstruction of the retaining walls. Next. We've supplemented the carriage road funding through the Friends of Acadia Second Century campaign, which in part bolstered the corpus of the carriage roads endowment. This was a $25 million capital campaign over a year and a half, and it was based on 4 pillars. Youth engagement, engaging the next generation. We set up an endowment, which we didn't have, protecting our natural resources, trails and carriage roads, and also very key visitor experience. Let's see here. Yep. We also replicated the Carriage Road campaign public-private model through the Acadia Trails Forever campaign, a $13 million campaign for Acadia's trails that created a long-term endowment to maintain the trails. The Trails Forever idea has been used by Golden Gate National Park and Cuyahoga National Park friends and organizations for fundraising efforts. Next. Fundraising for special projects. The National Park Service and Friends of Acadia may partner on specific projects that are outside normal annual expenditures. FOA sometimes uses a paddle raise during the benefit auction to generate funds for such projects. And sometimes these funds are matched with federal funding, either fees or a one-time appropriation from Congress. FOA's 26th annual benefit raised $221,000 for carriage roads and vista clearing. The funding helped the park secure an $85,000 Centennial Challenge grant to further the vista clearing work they needed to be done. This year at FOA's annual benefit in August, we will be asking donors to contribute funds to help the National Park Service repair and repoint the carriage road bridges. Last year we had a paddle raise, and it comes at the end of our annual auction for Bass Harbor Headlight, and we raised $326,000 that night just for Bass Harbor. We have a 6-year partnership with Canon USA that enabled us to fund the park's exotic plant management team, which is really key with removing all the invasives, which surveyed 1,100 acres of the park in 2018 and treated 27 invasive plant species, such as the Norway maple and glossy buckthorn, at 99 sites across Mount Desert Island, the Schoodic Peninsula, and surrounding islands. The goal of the program is to prevent invasive plant species from taking over Acadia's forests, thereby giving the native plants the Beatrix Farrand would have used the best possible chance at survival. Volunteerism, it is really at the heart of the organization. We're just blessed with just a great team of volunteers. Very interesting this year during the shutdown is managing volunteers during a government shutdown, because they just want to do everything they can. And it's luckily for Acadia, it came at a quiet time of year, but we did sign a volunteer agreement that allowed them to groom the trails for winter skiing, because it's very much a part of the activities that the local community enjoys. We have FOA has one full-time, year-round staff person dedicated to encouraging stewardship volunteerism. We hire 2 seasonal staff and train and equip volunteer crew leaders to facilitate individuals and groups working in the park. In 2018, 1,200 individuals contributed 9,887 hours of volunteer service on the trails and carriage roads from the beginning of June through mid-November. These volunteers help remove vegetation from between the stones. We call it flossing Mr. Rockefeller's teeth. They also focused on clearing out the back drains, the channels above the carriage roads that help direct water down to culverts and other drain features on the carriage roads. We are on the carriage roads, would not enjoy the global reputation for charm and beauty if it not for the donor of volunteers who dedicate their time and hard work to flossing between and around the coping stones. The hours upon hours they perform dragging brush for the crew helps open up more of their work to maintain and restore the carriage roads to their original condition. One event that we're extremely proud of is Take Pride in Acadia Day, and it comes in just, at the end of fall. We host this major event where volunteers come from all over the state of Maine to rake leaves from the ditches on the carriage roads and clear leaf dams in the culverts. The event has been going on for 28 years, and we often get participation from groups who not only volunteer in Acadia that day. For example, there's all sorts of colleges, Bowdoin and UMaine and Bates, and they bring their sorority sisters or groups to come out and volunteer. Where everyone is assigned a leader, given a rake and a giveaway, such as gloves or a hat, and transported to a site on the carriage roads to rake for 3 hours. The best part comes when they have what's called a CCC lunch, which is chili, cornbread, cider, and cake. It's a day where many people give back to the park and help the park and put the carriage roads down to bed for the winter and prevent spring erosion. One critical part of what we do is internships and just getting more youth out in the park. We have an Acadia Youth Conservation Corps, maintains an endowment that funds this conservation corps. Up to 16 high school age students working with 4 national park service leaders who train them on trails and road maintenance projects. In 2018, they assisted carriage roads crews primarily with work to clear up the back drains. You're hearing a lot about culverts and drains. Advocacy, also another key part of what we do and help support the park. We do that by lobbying for more funding in Washington and educating our congressional representatives on issues happening in Acadia. We also work with the park where lawmakers want to visit the park and have a behind-the-scenes tour and testify on issues of interest, such as air quality, partnership programs, and other threats or opportunities that arise. It should be noted that all Friends Group think of themselves as advocates, but we view it as critical to our mission. We should also note that the NPS employees are not allowed to lobby Congress themselves, but can be present at meetings and field trips to answer questions. It's a good thing to have FOA helping for the ask. I went down in March, middle of March, and met with our 4 delegates, Susan Collins, Senator Collins, and Senator King, and Golden and Pingree, and it was just really great. A number of us went, and it was coinciding with the acting Department of Interior. David Bernhardt was also in the park visiting, and we were able to go in for our visit on the Hill and bring them up to speed about the issues in the park, whether it was the increased visitation, the deferred maintenance. They wanted to know how our park was affected by the 35 days of a shutdown, and what were we seeing, and what were the losses. And so, being an advocate and going to Hill and talking to them so they're, up to speed on the real issues is really helpful. And then often they come visit us in the park, which is great. So questions? Yep.
Well, yeah, so maybe we should wait and do the questions at the end.
Yep, perfect.
I'm going to steal your mic.
Yep.
Passing the mic. That's fascinating and really wonderful to hear. So inspiring. So we also, our mission is very important to us, and our mission for the Beatrix Farrand Garden Association is to restore and preserve this beautiful garden, but also to advocate and to teach about Farrand's mission. And Farrand's legacy, and obviously her mission, which was much broader. But so part of that is a lot of we do education programs, and one of the most inspiring education program that I've ever been involved with over these years I've been here is the Green Teen program. So let's see, so this gives you a kind of an idea of how things go with the Green Teens. And it's a group, it's a youth empowerment program that's actually a program of the Cornell Cooperative Extension. And the teenagers that have come, we just completed our 8th season. And so the teens are coming to the garden. They're learning about actually food production and farming and gardening is part of that. And so I said, bring them to this garden and let them learn about landscape design. And we study through a series of workshops Farrand's landscape design ideas, and using those as a jumping off place for the kids to design their own gardens. And we study horticulture. And then the important thing that they all learn over the course of being in the garden in the spring is Farrand's legacy. And they see her as a woman who faced a great deal of obstacles to do her passion, to have this career. And so I think they're very inspired. And the kids that we've worked with have actually expanded the program to the Poughkeepsie Farm Project. And these kids are, some of them would really be considered at-risk youth. There's a number of them that live in a residential foster home, but they come to the garden, and I think they all find a sense of quiet and peace and a sense of safety here. They enter the garden gates and they feel they've sort of come to a safe place. And the other thing that is so important to me is that they realize that this is their garden. And this is because it's on the national park. It is a garden of the American people. And they get to know that this is not just a fancy, beautiful garden. It is their garden, and they can come anytime that it's open, dawn to dusk, free of charge. And so I feel like that creates a kind of a learning space for the kids. And so that's been a great joy for me teaching them and for, for our whole organization. And the other thing that's been fun is this last year, we've been able to incorporate the film in the workshops. And so we've been showing scenes from the film, and it gives a context for Farrand's life and her career, and they see her in her fancy clothes and can't fathom how she was out there gardening, in her tweeds and her, and then you see the picture of her as a debutante, and they're like, whoa. So anyway, it's just been a great joy, and then we've done a whole series of education programs, and I think I'm going to send it down to Karen to talk about a few of our other programs. Oh, Karen, you have your own. Okay. So, and you can have the clicker.
Oh, thanks. So this is my second season here at the Garden, and a program that was already in existence was the Hands in the Dirt workshop, and that is geared towards the public, any age, but it seems that it's mostly right now a program that's educating our volunteers, to be honest about the attendance of it. It seems that it's primarily attended by our volunteers, which is fabulous because I'm hopefully teaching them things they want to learn, and it's stuff that helps us, down the line in the maintenance of the garden. A big goal of mine, and the question about, how do you deal with millions of visitors, and to Anna's point, we don't have that, is that I would love to come up with programming that does speak more to the demographic of people in our area, because, there is an age and a race pattern to the people that attend our programs and the people who could visit our garden. I really strive to expand that. So the Hands in the Dirt workshops are supposed to be very minimum charge. You come and you learn practical knowledge that you can apply to your own garden. So the one that we had recently was how to maintain your tools, sharpening and cleaning all of your hand tools and getting them ready for the beginning of the year. And it looks like ones that we have pictures of here. Oh, earlier in the season last year was pruning all of our vines, and how to do that, and dividing are those irises, which, it's practical knowledge stuff. Am I on the next one too?
One more, yeah.
One thing that we did last year, which is, I think, the next thing, talking about national parks, but inviting people to come and use the space, as Ann said, because it's public and it's free of charge. Brainstorming ways that we can invite people to think about that this is your space to use. Come and have lunch here. Come and draw here. Come bring a guitar and practice guitar. I mean, really and truly, it should be a used place. And brainstorming ways to make that happen is one of my goals as the new person here. So I welcome any opinions and ideas from any of you. But yeah. Oh, so this is just more pictures of examples of things.
I thought the first one was going to be the other slide. Okay, doesn't matter, but when we get to that, I need your help. We're going to see if we can get a slide to turn into a video, which, as you can see from how the day's gone, Ann and I can. I'll just let you watch it, and then we'll know. It's short. Yeah, very short. So as part of our national park, one of the most important aspects of this garden is the public engagement. And although I'm a horticulturist, I really can take no credit for this gorgeous Farrand garden. My role is the park liaison to the friend partner. And the job is to foster the potential of this amazing Beatrix Farrand Garden Association. And when you see the film and you see the garden, you can realize the force that they are, and that my job is largely to keep obstacles to their success at bay, and that's about all it takes. And also to encourage inspired use of the garden by the public. So this little clip we showed you is a group of young dancers who choreographed a piece for the garden. And they just did that by my invitation. I thought this garden really deserved a dance, and we got one, and so I'm very pleased about that. Go back to my other little composite slide. The restoration and the continued care of this work of art is not the finish line for us. It's the jumping off point for our community. And whether that's, as Karen said, to paint, play music, ask someone on an impressive date, contemplate, meditate, ruminate, restore, and to take their personal experience forward in new and uniquely imagined directions. So they can surprise us, is how I see this achieving its full potential.
And there's one more slide.
Just, oh, sorry. Oh, wrong way. How do I go? Oh, dancers and then? There, yeah. Oh, yes. There's a place for everyone to enjoy. Can I show? This is Anne's daughter, who is a freshman in college. I like that she made the slideshow.
Okay, so can you hold
Yes.
your laptop? Yeah, we actually had, one of the green teens had said, I think I'm gonna propose in this garden. And we said, well, who is she? And he said, oh, I don't have anybody to get married to. When I do, I'm coming back here. No, he was the earlier one. Oh, and one more thing is the green teens are actually, we have a big group joining us tomorrow for the screening at 2. And we have not only Lede, who is sort of the star of the green teen scene in the film, but her entire family, including her little sister who just did the program this year. They're all coming, so.
The mission of Dumbarton Oaks Park Conservancy is to restore, promote, and maintain Dumbarton Oaks Park now and for generations to come. For this presentation, we'll briefly walk you through the volunteer, environmental education, and art in the park programs. They were created expressly to implement the mission. Here we go. In 2011, at the request of Rock Creek Park, our partner, the Conservancy took on the initiative to tackle the massive issue of invasives. We were fortunate to have Ann Aldrich's breadth of experience to create a strong volunteer program that would work to reveal the designed landscape from the shrouds of vines.
What happened? Volunteers making actual changes in the park was and continues to be critical to our success and is the driver that built community support and investment to restore the park. The Conservancy built the program by never saying no to a volunteer request. The consistent care and feeding of volunteers, from home-baked cookies to training, became the culture and represents the culture of the Conservancy. In partnership with Rock Creek Park, we train and empower the volunteers to get the job done safely and effectively. From 600 bags of English ivy to 800 linear feet of stiltgrass snakes, volunteers are making a difference and having a great deal of fun outside. University groups, embassies, church groups, corporations, garden clubs, scouts, master gardeners, alumni groups, elementary and secondary schools, and many others. These are the stewards of change. A few of their successful projects in reclaiming a sense of place include restoring the Clifton Hill Walk, planting the American Beech Grove, tree planting and installation of meadow fencing. And just a side note, the tree planting is all done with a nonprofit in DC called Casey Trees. We couldn't do it without them. But the other key thing is stewardship includes learning to clean up the work site and discovering natural wonders. Our environmental education program is another purposeful layer in working toward the restoration of Dumbarton Oaks Park.
In 2013, we formed the Leave No Child Inside environmental education program in response to the need of the youth in our greater community. The innovation, research, and development of this multidisciplinary programming is designed to meet the mission, vision, and strategic goals of the Conservancy. Childhood experiences in nature shape the developmental of lifelong environmental attitudes and values. Given the current state of the natural world, the importance of instilling environmental values in our children cannot be overstated. The mystery and enchantment of tall oaks and beeches that spread their branches over forest inhabitants, listening to the sound of crickets and cicadas in the meadow and watching frogs in a rambling stream, tuning into the sounds of warblers and wood thrushes during seasonal migrations, hearing the quiet of the snow as it falls on the woodland floor. These timeless phenomena are foreign to many of our children. This 27-acre pastoral oasis in the heart of Washington, Dumbarton Oaks Park, is a treasure trove of natural wonders, the perfect place for children to delve into the outdoors. Leave No Child Inside has 3 grounding principles: stewardship, recreation, and education. Programming includes the science of stormwater, the science of plants, Dumbarton Oaks Park Junior Rangers, Dumbarton Undercover, and here again, full of discovery, changing climate, changing parks. And Landscape by Design, developed in partnership with the National Park Service. 5 years ago, our partnership sent representatives to the National Association of Olmsted Parks for an educator's training on landscape design developed for Olmsted sites. The program, with a heavy emphasis on cultural landscapes, was then adapted to the history of Beatrix Farrand at Dumbarton Oaks. The program engages 4th grade children in guided docent-led tours of the formal and wild gardens to experience the site and discuss its unifying features of formal and wild. We then take this information into the classroom to do a design charrette with a series of modeling exercises of the 53-acre landscape, using design concepts that they've learned, and most importantly, using their imaginations. The funding to transport the kids to the site came from the National Park Foundation, Every Kid in the Park. Leave No Child Inside also includes the teaching of the Montgomery County Conservation Corps of Latin American Youth Center. These young adults are working to gain their GEDs and green job skills. The Conservancy's partnership began with in-field green jobs training with restoration projects and related certifications, and has evolved to include green tech training for the GPS mapping of our restoration sites, sentinel trees, and forest management areas, a critical component in garden restoration documentation. The training includes importing the field collected data to our Esri digital database. This work was supported by Rock Creek Park and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It's never too early to start building those layers of experience. Developed in 2016, Blossoms and Bloomers is a program for babies and caretakers to go on nature walks in spring and fall, the seasons for which Farrand designed the garden. The tradition of an annual lecture series has been in place since the origination of the Conservancy. We've been honored to have speakers such as E.O. Wilson, Elizabeth Barlow Rogers, Larry Weiner, and Claudia West as unique storytellers of this site. The series is now a 2-day event with an in-field component that engages our audience in the processes of master planning. The first master planning sessions were focused on vegetation and stormwater. Superintendent Julia Washburn, second to the right in that photograph, co-led the second sessions on interpretation and education. We are deeply thankful to have such an invested team to work with at Rock Creek Park National Park Service. The third pillar of our programs is Art in the Park.
Art in the Park, a step in the Conservancy's strategic planning, established in 2016 with an artist in residence, was initially a big stretch of the imagination for our community. Without fully realizing it, our at-risk landscape had been revealed and its importance was coming forward. It was time to draw on the rich cultural legacy that this site has to offer and engage the public in this lens of the garden experience. The artist in residence and environmental education coordinator work together on Art in the Park programming. The following slides are of various art activities inspired by the park. Photography, drawing classes, en plein air, Stravinsky's Dumbarton Oaks, commissioned by the Blisses, inspired by the park. Arcadia, a piece by Ray Caskey, designed for Gray Arbor Memorial. The landscape features realistically reflect the earlier state of the trees and foliage, but the figures, bending to put hands and or feet into the water, are wearing classical robes to allude to the Arcadian ideal, a vision of a place that never was and never will be, but that we aspire to when we design gardens. And last but not least, cinematography. We look forward to the fantastic film featured this evening and the many Farrand-designed landscapes it explores. Thanks so much for having us at the Beatrix Farrand Garden Association.
What was the Stravinsky Dumbarton Oaks what?
Concerto.
Concerto.
Oh, it's marvelous.
What, is it a bunch of instruments?
Pull it up right now, it's short.
It's what? It's a string quartet? I mean, have they played it in the music room at Dumbarton Oaks? Did they do it at Dumbarton Oaks in the music room? So I could Google it?
Oh, yeah. We could do it right now. It's a short piece, but it's just beautiful.
So my daughter Campbell in the back has a microphone. She can run around a cordless mic. So when we have questions, Campbell will come running with a microphone.
Some of us tell us who you are and how you happen to come, what you do. It's so interesting to know.
Here we go.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Cynthia Goldberg, excuse me. I live part of the time here and part of the time on St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And I work with the St. George Village Botanical Garden there. Started out as a gardener. It's a small botanical garden, but it's exquisite because it's part of the original village sugarcane plantation. But my question is about volunteerism. You mentioned several different areas that you get your volunteers from, but specifically, how do you address the people to get those volunteers, like corporations and schools and churches? Do you go directly to the churches and the schools and the corporations, rather than just doing a please come?
Somehow, Mildred and Beatrix are always shining down on us and sending us people. We do have a website. And I think word of mouth has spread between the schools and the churches and now corporations. I mean, we just had PayPal in a couple of weeks ago. Did a fantastic job.
Yes.
So.
Excellent.
Do they just show up? Do you have special days?
They write to us and inquire if we could use volunteers. We send back, yes, of course we can, what dates you're thinking of. Then we scramble to see if we can find leadership within the conservancy.
And chores for them to do, so because they
we
can't
have
just...
plenty of chores, not a problem.
And plenty of tools to give them and gloves and all that kind of thing?
We have tools that the Park Service has helped fund. The Georgetown Garden Club has been very generous. And we have gloves. We have Technu, which I highly recommend for everybody working.
Do you have ticks in Washington?
Oh, yes, we have ticks. So we give them a safety talk. We give them a garden history talk. And then we train them in the project that we're going to do that day. And if somebody has been in the garden more than once or twice, they get tapped on the shoulder and said, hey, would you meet those 4 or 5 people over there? And we just then go out in the park to the site we're working on and do the job. We try and work for 4-hour segments. Sometimes they're cut down to 3, but 4 hours allows them to see the garden to feel really productive. It's so fantastic when they've cleaned a wall of vines off and they stand back. And we give them snacks and water.
How many of you are there who supervise?
It depends on how many additional volunteers that have been there, but sometimes it's only one or two for up to 50, sometimes to 100
Because volunteers need to be
volunteers.
supervised.
Yes, and that's absolutely critical. The job of whoever in the Park Service is leading the event is to actually walk around and engage every, did I say Park Service?
You did. Did you mean that, or did you?
No, I meant the conservancy
okay.
person's
Oh.
job is
Yeah.
to walk around and ensure that every volunteer is actively engaged. If you see somebody standing on the side, you find out why they might be taking a break and is there anything you can do, and then you redirect them. And so it's just kind of a herding and shepherding.
Projects to people too. So you have, we look at the group and figure out what would be the best project for them, I think. And we have always had a staff position in place in leadership dedicated to the volunteer program. We run 2 public volunteer days a month, year-round. And then there's an A-team. We've got some board members. Our co-founder, Lou Slade, in the back row there. You can see him out in the field here and there running events.
I mean, volunteers are work. You have
Yes.
to work to get something good out of volunteers. It's very challenging. And then everyone's rewarded, but if it isn't properly organized, it can be a problem, I think.
How about Ann? So at Acadia, every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday from 8:30 at Park headquarters, a Friends of Acadia paid staff member is there coordinating the troops. And I really, we have no shortage of volunteers. And I think if you're passionate about something, people just want to come and help and clean. The only time we have an issue is when it's pouring cold rain or something. But they get a Friends of Acadia volunteer shirt. It's pretty identifiable. That's a turquoise color or a hat. And I know when I'm out on the trails, I always stop and thank the crews. And, it's kind of cool. It's a cool thing to do. You see lots of teenagers and, all sorts of people come out, and they're really proud of the fact they're out in the park volunteering.
Volunteerism is a really American thing. These days, one always sees all the faults going on in America, but if you think about the good things, other European countries, for instance, just are so admiring of the way we do things. And it is a wonderful thing to people make friends. When I started the Conservatory Garden and had that first Tuesday groups, those were people, we needed them to go out into the city and say, that place isn't dangerous. You should come and see it. They were our ambassadors. And so I didn't mean to suggest, I just know that to have a good, successful volunteer program, it has to be organized.
I find that it's easy.
Tell us who you are.
It's too complicated.
No, just your name. You come from the city.
Kathy Kling, now I come from Connecticut, and what I'm asking about is in Connecticut I work in a greenhouse that was part of the property of Colonel Montgomery, the Montgomery spruce.
Oh, yeah, the Montgomery program at NYBG and Fairchild.
Yeah. Anyway, we run, it's in Greenwich, and this is going to surprise you, we're always out of money. We don't get any sponsorship from the town. We run on a shoestring, and every quarter we're 1 quarter away from closing. We have volunteers in the greenhouse, but we have a lot of projects on the property that we would like to do. And my question is it easier to have a specific project that you get repeat volunteers coming back for, or to have sort of one interesting, big, sexy idea that you try and get a lot of people to show up for first Tuesday of the month for several months and try and complete the project?
Good question.
It depends on the site. Sense of place, placemaking from, within our 27 acres, there's Clifton Hill Walk, and placemaking is a long, long, long process because we've just pulled back the invasive curtain. So for us, reaching to the point where people are actually connecting and taking personal ownership, investment, philanthropic charge of microsites throughout the park is, coming around the corner. But this.
We have 35 acres, and it used to be a residential property and garden. It is now a woodland walk area. Like, we're just besieged with Japanese knotweed.
It's a call to action, that's it, right? This place needs you as much as you need to give to it. And it's just that dialogue of conversation and revealing and care and feeding. Anne spent 3 years making, 200 cookies before every and contributing those to the Conservancy's efforts. We've sent out the recipes and literally, we go into panels and you'll hear, well, it was Anne's cookies. So we just kept making cookies.
That's fascinating. I never heard that before. Oh, God, no goodness, I never had heard about that. I couldn't have.
Butter and sugar will get you every time.
But it's the personal touch, sense of place, connecting to the place, connecting to the people, and that extra little, offering and that continual dialogue just creates that relationship of inviting people in again and again. So, find what you love best about it and do that. And then just spread that sunshine.
Yeah, because they will follow
No matter
your
how
passion.
terrible of a project it is, right?
Yeah.
Well, then there's the T-shirt that Anna was talking about, the T-shirt idea, so that people can be identified as doing it.
I would just say, to answer your question, consistency, like the Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 8:30, 11:30, everyone kind of knows that. That's the drill. And they show up and we have plenty of crews there signing them, but also making them feel valued, and just thanking them. We have a event in mid-May and September where we have a thank you lunch for them. And it's, underwritten, and they just really look forward to that kind of opening and closing of the park, and they've made some great friends over the years. So it's community and consistency, I think, helps. And just in branding, whether for us it's chili and cornbread and a T-shirt or a hat or whatever. So just finding.
Also projects that really require kind of a time of the essence factor. So projects that we've done, that we do not do this now, we're going to lose this stand of trees, we need your help. Architectural pieces that need to be saved. I mean, really those things, you've got to protect the things that have to be protected immediately, right? And then you can kind of circle out. But those are some of the projects that people just are so dedicated about because they know the time is now.
Do you do certain days that people know, or do you know? Because to me, that was the success of the program I started.
We do Saturday, we don't have a set schedule. We do try and identify 2 days a month on the weekend, a couple months ahead.
And you send that out to...
Yes, and that's sent out, it's posted on the website and stuff. But I like this idea of set Tuesday, Thursday, Friday.
It's a good thing because then people say to their friend, well, I'm going up there next Tuesday. Why don't you come with me? I picked Tuesday because it was convenient for me 35 years ago, and it still works as Tuesday, and Anne picked it up here. I mean, we have other days too, but we only let the really, really good people come other days. Well, there are too many complicated plans to have people not, but Tuesdays is...
I'm Marshall Brown, Director of Horticulture at New York City Parks, and I came here because I got to come with Lyndon, which was amazing conversation we had on the way up
Just
here.
incidentally, a year ago, Marshall and I organized a symposium for 350 people, all the organizations in New York connected with greening, and it was about the importance of horticultural maintenance in city parks. And there've been really good things that have come out of that, but she and I cook up a lot of things like that together.
You're dangerous, Lyndon. A force of nature, as my commissioner once said. The question I have is that I've worked in urban horticulture for most of my career, and I worked in two very challenged neighborhoods. One was in West Harlem, and the other was in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn. And I'm just wondering what approaches you take to bringing in folks who don't look like all of us into your parks and into your gardens, and how do you engage them, and do you do something different with them than you do with other folks who are ready and eager to come? How do you draw in those people where the concept of a garden is kind of foreign to them?
I would contradict you that I don't think the concept of a garden is foreign to them. I think that they don't necessarily, that I can't necessarily speak to a community I'm not a part of and tell them what it's good for. I need to be open to hearing what is good for them. So something I'm thinking about a lot, and I just moved to Poughkeepsie and I've just become a part of this community, is that I would like to find out who is here and what do they need. Right? Like, I love that we have all these volunteer days, but that might not be a priority for a different community. Or I love that we're having this symposium, but this might not be a priority for a different community. So I would like to keep my ears open and figure out what our garden is good for them, you know, and making the point that because we all work in conjunction with national parks, people need to understand that they own it. It's not just that, like, hey, it would be great if you could come visit. It's like, no, like, you own this just as much as I own this. And it's providing something really important for me, but I need to figure out what it provides that's important for them. So I think there's a real conversation that needs to be done in our community, in the city of Poughkeepsie and in Hyde Park, where there is a very diverse community that is not represented here. And it's important to me, since I got this job, to figure out how to make that connection. And I used to work at a public park in Washington Heights, where the majority of my visitors were not white. And it was a totally...
What park was that?
I took care of the Morris Jamel Mansion grounds.
Oh, right.
So I never had this problem. I never had to have this conversation, because all of my volunteers were very diverse, all of our programming was very diverse, my summer camp was very diverse. So this is a new challenge for me, but it's something I think about a lot.
Do any of you go to them, bring them, yes? Get them to come?
And I was just talking to one of the other, the Bard, who is Amy? Amy Farrand was talking, who leads up the garden program, landscape programming at Bard, that, you know, she brought up a great idea. What if you came up with grants to make transportation easier for certain communities to come here? But again, like, that's me assuming that they want to get on the bus and come here. I have to figure out what it is that would work for them, right? What would interest them to take ownership. Making too many assumptions, I think, is where you kind of hit a brick wall with stuff like that. But
I think sometimes just inviting people, I know that at Undermar Gardens down in Yonkers, I don't know if you've ever
Been there. But when that first started, I remember going there, and there were a lot of people from Yonkers milling around outside the garden, and I said, aren't you going in? And they said, well, I don't think we're allowed. And I know that Steve Burns, the director, has done a lot of sort of big fireworky type, you know, invitation, you know, come. And now that place is packed.
they've had a lot of programming that has been specifically welcoming to many different
But it seems so simple and obvious, you know, but sometimes people aren't going to come until they've been invited.
Right. Yeah, something I've brainstormed a lot about is bringing more music into our garden. And I would love to bring more diverse music experiences into the garden. And I think that might make people feel ownership and community.
I wouldn't underestimate the power of Beatrix Farrand's sites to welcome people in in and of themselves. I mean, you spoke to this earlier. You see people just unfurl. Little people just become, and programming can start with just being. You know, experiencing the 1,000-acre wood that is Dumbarton Oaks Park, walking down Lover's Lane, and Beatrix Farrand can hold all that water. And then, after everyone's been invited in, it can be as simple as that. You can kind of do these moments of discovery, and then a little bit later you hear, oh, that's Beatrix Farrand over there, and they're this tall, and having serious conversations, and it happens, and programming then kind of takes hold in terms of that. But I think that Farrand's designs really are the genesis of purpose in the way that it works for these sites so much.
I think Steve and I are hoping that the film will do precisely that, because an awful lot of people cry at this. And I've been crying over it ever since, and I've seen it 100 times. But one thing I do want to say that unites us all and every human being is that people, if you can get them out into nature, it speaks to something in their souls, and it's good for people, and it's important, everything that all of us are doing, because if people feel good about being out in nature, then maybe they'll do more to try to protect it and save it and have good things for themselves.
I would like to thank the National Park Foundation's Every Kid in the Park, because that funding has allowed us to bring people, students, fourth graders, to interact with them from other parts of Washington, D.C. Our park is located in Upper Georgetown, one of the richest segments of Washington, D.C. It's on the west side of Rock Creek, and the diverse community is generally on the east side of the creek. So we've worked really hard to try and build those bridges, and Every Kid in the Park has been really key to that. And also the Montgomery County Conservation Corps has been a fantastic way to interact with the Latin American Youth Center and introduce kids to the park. And just about every single Montgomery County conservation student who's worked in that park, because they work about 8 weeks out of the year in the park, now calls it their home, and they bring their lovers and their family to see their park.
That's the key.
Hi, I am Amy Perella. I'm from Bard College, and I oversee the gardens and horticulture and trees on the Bard College campus, including Montgomery Place campus. And I just want to thank you all for coming and gathering today and giving us your experience and telling us all about all of your experiences, actually. It's helpful for me to hear as a caretaker of that property and learn from you guys. And I wanted to say two things. One was we, every year, starting a few years ago, have a salon series at Bard, and I think our next year will be about women in horticulture, so I'd love to maybe involve and work with you all on something in that vein. And then also funding. Bard is typically seen as a very wealthy college, but we have these beautiful, beautiful gardens, Blythewood and Montgomery Place, and those aren't explicitly well-funded at all. And so we are, and I specifically am constantly trying to figure out how to keep them going. We have one at Blythewood that's 116 years old this year, and the infrastructure is crumbling, and we are constantly trying to figure out how to have fundraisers for it at this point. We are working with the Garden Conservancy on this mission, but it often costs money to have a fundraiser and to not completely come out, to come out ahead is very hard, actually. And so when you said $300 and some thousand was raised with the paddle event, I really want to know what is going on there, because I don't know how that happened. And then I just like to know of other successful fundraisers that you guys have had, if you don't mind telling us your secret.
I hate to tell you, but the Central Park Conservancy charges $1,500 a piece for ladies to come with their hats on in the conservatory garden, and they make, and it kills me because the money doesn't go to the conservatory garden, for $3 to $4 million for lunch. Isn't that awful? Does Bard own or run Montgomery Place, the beautiful house? Oh, wow.
So we have a number of successful fundraisers, but we have an annual benefit and silent and live auction. We have a number of items that are from the park that are of high demand, whether they're trail signs or all sorts of just kind of unique experiences in the park, and special offerings. Then we have a live auction, which are 4 or 5 kind of items. We have a auctioneer that runs that. And then we've, over the years, we have a paddle raise. And we've had 14 years of paddle raises. And we've gone from, I think, 20,000 to 328 or 48,000. And people, we're getting away from the silent and live auction items. People were having a little bit of auction fatigue, donor fatigue. People are tired of being asked and then coming to we have 550 people in the middle of August, and it's a sit-down dinner. So over the years, the paddle race has really taken on traction, and we feature.
What does that mean, Anna? What is that? What's a paddle race?
Okay, so paddle race, let's say this year's paddle race, it's our 30th anniversary for the benefit auction, is around the restoration of some of the carriage road bridges, of the repointing and coping stones and stuff. And so at the end, after we've been through the silent and live auction, we then have a literally stick up your paddle, and it starts, I hate to say, about $75,000 and goes down. And usually we've lined up a couple of donors who will make that kind of silent bid. And it's for the specific program. So whether it was Bass Harbor Headlight or other programs in the park where the park has needs and prioritizes. Yeah.
But to kind of figure out a way to make it,
Yeah. Does that answer all your questions? Yeah.
Debbie Glenn, I'm one of the weeders here, and I was just thinking about getting volunteers, and it made me think of something you did, Ann, a couple of years ago. If you come up with a crazy enough thing for them to do, it draws kids out, crawling underneath the hedges, weren't they, to weed under those hemlock. I don't know where you got those kids from, but they loved it, apparently. They got on their bellies and they were...
Yeah. Yeah, those were the Poughkeepsie Day.
They just got surprised with that. We didn't lure them in. They were just gifted with that task by hand.
But they loved it.
They enjoyed it. No, but that is somewhat matching what they said earlier, matching your activity to your group. And I think, sometimes when you do have Japanese knotweed breathing down and you have, 10 people on a Tuesday morning, it's easy to forget to say the why of it and take the time to let people know what they did, because to me, people's time is so much more precious even than their money. We can wrangle money, I can't, I work for the Park Service, but you can get people to raise a paddle for a culvert more easily than you can find 4 hours in your day to go help somebody with knotweed. So I think never forgetting the why and how much we value what they're doing.
One more question? Yes, Steve. He started it, he's going to finish it.
All of you could just speak to what it is you think about Farrand's particular magic, her landscapes, that is the thing that speaks to people with such power from all sorts of different walks of life and all sorts of different perspectives.
I was just going to say, because I loved what Lindsay was saying about don't underestimate the power of her design. And I also think not to underestimate the power of her legacy and who she was as a person. And I think the young people and young people of color that we've had in our programs, they're up against a lot of obstacles in their lives, and they see Farrand was up against some serious obstacles as a woman in her field, and they are inspired by that. And I feel that that is part of the reason why these the landscapes speak, but so does she. Through the ages, she's speaking to them. And so for me, it's why I do what I do, because I see how these young people love the garden and they love Farrand. They love her, and I think, okay.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And I can't wait to, after speak, because this will be the first time they've seen it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
So we
nice.
must ask them afterwards,
Yeah.
what do they think? Did they learn something new about her?
Yeah, I can't wait.
Can you guys speak to that?
Yeah. Pass it around.
I think her, the use of the native plant palette for the park, and I think really, I think about her Reef Point property and what she was cultivating there as far as a serious botanical study, education spot, and she couldn't make it work, and she ended up dismantling it in the 50s, mid-50s. And I think she was really maybe 20 years ahead of her time. Because 20 years later, the College of the Atlantic was formed, which was human ecology is the only major you can get there. And they have a garden of hers. So she's still very relevant, I think, very modern in the way she was thinking at the time still.
I just thought of one, there's so many things, but the five senses and the way she touches in on each one of those, so you have this really rich, holistic, vibrant, sensorial experience. The soundscape of the waterway, the topography going down, deep dive in the green, up into the verticals, the sky, the earth, the play of light, the scent, all of these things in this very gentle way. And then you find out a little bit more about her, and she was hilarious. I mean, she just had this great way of kind of charging through these projects and, making her point, but lifting things up and carrying forward. And then there's just the many faces of Farrand. I feel like Lyndon was saying that she talks to Farrand. Well, so do I, so does she, so does she. Oh yeah, we're all having a lot of conversations. How is that? But there is a dialogue there, and it just gets richer and richer and richer. She's just given us so much in so many ways to work with at these sites that it somehow has an easiness to it. And I mean, I just roll my eyes, I quit, I'm done, and then here it comes again, and we keep going, And it's wonderful, so.
I would add to that the kind of brilliance in all of these sites, and you especially see it in Dumbarton Oaks and Acadia, just because they're bigger places, is the reading of the site prior to the design. So the ability to really look at a piece of land and analyze it and create some kind of story. I mean, at Dumbarton Oaks, she took all of these, farm buildings and turned them into garden follies and grottos, and there became a narrative and a story through which you move through that time and space of the garden. And it's amazing because you feel it with your body as you're moving through this place. And so I feel it, 6-year-olds feel it, all of these different people that come to the garden. So for me, that's the thing that I'm thinking about. You want to add anything?
Ditto.
But But one of the things about and you'll see it in the film, but I'm not sure whether we exactly said that when she first visited Dumbarton Oaks and she met Mrs. Bliss, and Mrs. Bliss said, I want you to tell me what you think we should do with this 27 acres, is it? And she was so excited about it. She was thrilled that there was a 50-foot drop from the house. The rest of us would think, oh my God, I'm going home, I can't do this. No, she was thrilled with it, but also the most amazing thing was she designed the whole of Dumbarton Oaks in that first letter. Everything it became 20 years later, she knew it right away. And you'll see Mrs. Bliss said you got it. But it's one of the things that's most astonishing about her.
Yeah.
I wonder too if the way she yielded to the land rather than working the land to her, and the energy around that use of the land might, to me, I think there's some aspect of design that.
There's a wonderful article by her there's a lovely book of all her writings. And she was about 20-something when she wrote one of the first pieces, and it's about Mount Desert. And she talks about how you should put evergreens on the west side of the place so that the shadows in the afternoon came onto the grass. The woman was 20 years old. I can't get over it. And she had this enormous response to nature, and of course she spent so many years on Mount Desert, so it's so much fun for all of us. We've all been there, right? So you get to see what's still there of her.
I'm pretty much saying everything everyone's already said, but I just marvel at how busy she was. I mean, it's just astonishing when you look back at her legacy, and I think Acadia is really blessed to have her as part of their history. And she just knew what went where. So she had some kind of instinct that was just sustainable and just inherent. So I'm really lucky to be learning more and more about her and how it relates to all these sites and areas.
We can't wait for you to see this film.
And I so hate to cut this conversation short, but we have much more fun things to do over there, and we can continue the conversation. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I am Sarah Peacock, the president of the Beatrix Farrand Garden Association, and it's just been a fabulous afternoon. I think we all can agree that it was wonderfully informative and inspiring and just great. So I want to thank Lyndon for being here and all the panelists for participating and giving your time and effort and travel and everything. So thank you very much. And I also want to say many, many, many thanks go to Karen Smythe, Ann Sims, Karen Waltuck, for putting this symposium together this weekend, and also to Linda Patzner and her wonderful committee for what we are going to experience later today and tomorrow. So many, many thanks to all of you. And then for those of you who might have missed the beginning of this whole section, Karen introduced the Beatrix Farrand Alliance, and I will just say that I hope you read about it in the program right there. And take time to go to it if it's something that you think could be very helpful to you, or send others to it if you think others can find it to be helpful to them, and that way we can further discuss and foster Beatrix Farrand's legacy. And if you are joining us for dinner, the reception and dinner will take place next door and begins at 5:30, so we have a little time to take a break and wander around. And then the movie will begin at 7:30. in the theater. So, thank you all very, very, very much.